So I want to talk about the anti-Asian assaults, harassment and hate crimes that are rising as coronavirus spreads. And this is being helped by the likes of the authoritarian wannabe government here in Australia, Scott Morrison, and also Donald Trump. And, you know, in Western countries, the rise in anti-Asian propaganda that because the US empire wants to inevitably invade China because China is a threat to them economically. And so we're going to hear all sorts of awful propaganda about China from now until the time that they do that, and that's disturbing. Every day some nonsense comes up about China, and at the latest, of course, is the Uyghurs. And I'm not saying there isn't some problem there may be, but Adrian Zenz is an evangelical Christian who's a bit, shall we say, unhinged, and he's been going for all he's worth on mainstream media, talking about how the Uyghurs are now being sterilized, forced sterilized, and that kind of thing. That's actually something that they did in relation to Tibet, and it turned out that that was actually false. Reports, looking into the Tibetans being forced sterilized, etc., in the early 2000s, and I can leave a link to that. And so the same is happening now with China in relation to the Uyghurs being forced sterilized. So there's all sorts of different things coming out about China now because the US has China in its crosshairs, and because China is an economic threat to them. And so with that, you get anti-Asian hate crimes on the rise. And I'm going to share with you some of the types of things that happen just in the United States. And this is not a exhaustive list. It's not a comprehensive list. So in June, in Wyckoff, New Jersey, a Chinese restaurant was vandalized with graffiti that read "Coronavirus and COVID-19." On June 14th in Newark, flyers targeting Asian and Asian American students were found off campus housing at the University of Delaware, New York. The flyers included the message "Kill China Virus." June 13th, Queens, New York, a man at a Bayside 7-Eleven made anti-Asian remarks regarding the COVID-19 pandemic and then verbally harassed an Asian customer whom he also allegedly pushed. June 6th, Denver, Colorado, 2 Asian American people were verbally accosted while walking along the street by a woman who told them they smell like shit and "you guys are all disgusting, you all." How easy is it to just turn people, manufacture consent for wars, but also just turn people... Racism is just under the surface in our society, really. Look at what's happening in Australia. There's an increase in anti-Asian attacks to the point where China is actually warning people to stop coming to Australia, that it's dangerous to come here. How embarrassing is this? Not only embarrassing, but it's disgusting, and I'm ashamed. And this is, our government is promoting this. In fact, they've actually increased the military budget $289 billion with a B, which is all aimed at, it's all being connected to the US empire having China in its crosshairs. And that is assisted by the Australian Strategic Policy Institute here in Australia, that actually informs the government. And if you look at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, their website, they are funded heavily and mostly by weapons industries like Northrop and Lockheed Martin and the like. So and it's informed by US right-wing neocon think tanks who are like present danger China. I'm not sure if they're funding it. They're actually funded by the US, but the present danger China is the sort of stuff that you will see on this Australian Strategic Policy Institute. So they're informing the Australian government. This is the sort of cracked, unhinged sort of think tanks that are really just they help manufacture consent for war. So and this is what leads to these sort of attacks, and we have it in Australia even. And by the way, this is just faux fleece. It's not real fleece. I'm vegan, so I do my best to avoid animal products and animal use in general. So anyway, on June 3rd in Brooklyn, New York, conspiratorial anti-Chinese flyers were posted in the Bay Ridge area. Now, I know who's posting that. It's the Epoch Times, which is a Falun Gong funded organization, and the Falun Gong is really more like a cult than anything. And we have the Falun Gong here in Australia, and they have all sorts of really wacky sort of beliefs. I'll post a link to that. It's really, really, really over the top, and they believe that Donald Trump is going to save us all and that kind of thing. That's not the wackiest. There's wacky beliefs that they have. So that's probably what I know, that the Falun Gong have. This Epoch Times is rabidly anti-Chinese, putting out rabid anti-Chinese propaganda all over the world. And I know in the Bay Area, someone was saying that during COVID they were handing out flyers about China and how evil they are, etc. So these flyers blame the spread of COVID-19 on Chinese immigrants. And by the way, there's been two recent reports. One about Italy, how they've done some scientific research, and apparently in Italy, COVID-19 has existed since December and in 2019. And there's a recent report in Brazil that they've discovered that it was actually around in November 2019. So maybe the US has already meddled in Brazil. I was going to say maybe it should be invading Brazil and Italy. I'm joking. But this scientific research, of course, is conveniently ignored by the mainstream media, because the Western media want to go along with the national security state narrative about China and anything evil about China, the yellow peril kind of thing. So you won't be hearing much about that, how this virus has existed in Brazil and Italy, November and December in 2019. So on May 30th in San Mateo in California, racist anti-Chinese messages were found in Laurelwood neighborhood, written on utility boxes and poles. May 23rd in Seattle, Washington, a man harassed Asian people at a park, and an Asian woman in her car saying, "Where are you from? Where is your ID? And Chinese disease, they bring it here." Later, the man allegedly yelled anti-Asian remarks inside an Asian restaurant. May 22, San Leandro, California, a woman was arrested after posting handwritten flyers on homes that read in part, "If you are a woman or man and was born in other country, return, go back to your land immediately, fast and urgency." That's not very good English. And in this place, no Asians allowed. There's been this attacks on Asian people now for a long time in the United States and in Australia. And there was even a massacre in the late 1800s in the US, a massacre of Chinese. We've had a long history here of anti-Chinese propaganda, and so it does anti-Chinese sentiment, and so it doesn't take an anti-Chinese propaganda by the Murdoch press. You only really hear from the Murdoch press how oppressive China is. Nothing good about China at all, really, except when it might benefit the Murdoch empire or something like that, or the Australian government in some way. But oftentimes they keep to that narrative that the Chinese are kind of, the undercurrent of it is that they're barbarians and the likes, that sort of thing. And are there problems in China? Of course there is, just like any country. But the US empire pointing its finger at China for human rights abuses, and a lot of that is invented. Pointing the finger at China is just laughable, considering what the US is involved in. And if you watch this channel, but if you follow the Empire Files with Abby Martin or the Grey Zone, or if you just have a look at independent media, you can see the sort of outrageous things, not only domestically but abroad, that the US is involved in. So they have no moral authority whatsoever. They're probably on the lowest point of any sort of moral authority to be criticizing any country. So anyway, in May 17th, Contra Costa, California, a farm stand displayed a racist sign that read, "Fresh bat soup and thank you, China." May 15th. And by the way, anybody who is consuming animals, using animal products, buying animal products from China or elsewhere, or is contributing from anywhere really. I mean, the whole animal agriculture industry is a soup for superbugs and viruses. And there's been sort of talk about, there's zoonotic diseases popping up all the time. So if we're not vegan, we're contributing to this. Anybody who's pointing the finger at China or any other country and they're not vegan, it's a little bit silly and a little bit hypocritical. So on May 15th, New York, and I won't read all these out, but this just gives you an idea of how easy it is to turn people to the people that gladly participate in vilifying and otherizing people who have been, even people that have been born in the United States that are American citizens that happen to be Asian or Muslim or whatever. It's just sad. So in New York, an Asian woman was verbally harassed by fellow subway passenger for not wearing her mask properly, in quotes. The passenger yelled at the victim and said, "You effing Chinese don't speak English, go back to China." End quote. She also slapped the victim's phone away. I mean, wow. May 12th, and this is only going to get worse. This is the tragedy of it. It's only going to get worse the more the US empire ramps up the anti-Chinese propaganda and lies and all of that to help them manufacture consent for a war on China, or just building up weapons against China. That's the other thing. The weapons industry loves anything that's saber rattling towards any country, because they can then go and buy the Western countries then buy heaps and heaps of weapons. And Australia is turning into more of a weapons manufacturer than any other sort of manufacturing, which is what has happened in the United States. And where you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I mean, if what you're doing is basically ramping up weapons manufacturing in your country, you're going to be looking for countries to bomb and attack. So in May 12th, Stevens Point in Wisconsin, I think was it Wichita, WI, I'm not sure, I'm not American. A man was arrested after using racial slurs against Asian customers in a grocery store. According to police, quote, the customers were called names and harassed for wearing masks because of their race, end quote. I mean, in the United States, aren't people encouraged to wear masks anyway? And this has been a long-standing tradition, really, in Asian countries to wear masks. And that's because, there are viruses that go around in winter, and there's in heavily populated areas. It's incredibly easy to pick up a virus. I picked up a virus in Vietnam in 2012 just from going through a market, and it was just a normal market. And there's a lot of people there, and that's what happens when you have densely populated areas. It's very easy. So it's actually sensible to wear a mask and wash your hands. And I'm thinking that, with the rise in viruses and the increase in population, where it's going to be in 2050, it's going to be 11 billion or 10 point something billion with a B. I think we're going to have to start doing that more and more, wearing masks and always vigilant with washing your hands and all that kind of thing. So it's silly to really be criticizing anyone for wearing masks or for washing your hands. And of course, we should be taking vitamin D for David. And that's something that isn't widely known, that there's actually a global D deficiency, not just because people are spending more time indoors, but I'm not even sure why, but even people that are getting enough sun are D deficient, and that can lead to all sorts of diseases like cancer and diabetes, but it also puts one in a high-risk category for COVID-19. If you're D deficient, you're more likely to die of COVID-19. If you contract it and you end up in ICU, you're more likely to die of COVID-19 if you're D deficient, particularly people who are brown and black skin color, particularly black people, because they're often D deficient and they don't even realize it. So, these are things that we need to keep in mind as time goes on. And so in May 14th, San Luis Obispo, California, the Cal Poly Chinese Student Association's Zoom meeting was disrupted by unknown participants who drew swastikas and filled the chat box with xenophobic comments blaming the pandemic on people of Chinese descent. Swastikas. Okay. So, and it goes on, there's a whole, almost every day, and April, a few times a day even, it goes through a list. I'll put a link to this. It's from the Anti-Defamation League, and I'm not actually endorsing the Anti-Defamation League because they often promote Zionism. But so there's a long list of different things that you can read here, going way back through March. It's terrible, really. So I won't read all of them, but I'm assuming that it's just going to get worse and worse. So anyway, thank you for watching. My name's Trish Roberts. Let's be vigilant about this anti-Chinese propaganda and do research. Just don't take everything at face value. Look at the sources, look at the motivation for that. Think about if it's being, particularly if it's posted by mainstream media, just think about the sources and think about what happens every time there is this attempt to cause a war with another country. You always will get that anti-Russian or anti-Chinese or anti-Vietnamese or it just goes on and on. That's something that happens every time the powers that be, the establishment, want to wage a war against a country. Suddenly, everything that country, the whole existence of that country is vilified, and the people in the country are vilified. And we have to resist going along with that, because it ends up in terrible violence towards just everyday people, and it ends up in a war that ends up killing millions, like what happened, with Iraq, and after 9/11, that was used to increase surveillance on the public. It was used to engage in endless wars, and the mainstream media manufactured consent on lies for the war on Iraq. WMDs was a lie, and everybody, and George W. Bush knew it. Even Nancy Pelosi knew it, and she went along with it. She should be at The Hague too. These people that enable this war, any war, and it's on lies, and you can pretty much say that most wars are caused for imperialist games. Imperialism is inextricably linked with capitalism, and so that's how. And the end stages of capitalism, you're going to get fascism, and I'm going to talk about that just very briefly. How even on the left, there are certain leftist sources that are giving hat tips and trying to conflate right-wing populist movements with left-wing populist movements as if they have the same goals in common, which is a very dangerous narrative, and I'm going to talk about that in another video very briefly. And also about YouTube and how there's people giving hat tips to Nazis on the side, and that's actually also normalizing Nazism. Just keep in mind too that the US actually denounced rejecting Nazism in 2014 at the UN, that along with Canada and Ukraine. Not surprising that Ukraine denounced it, but I mean, just think about that. The US denounced rejecting Nazism in 2014 and has, I think, subsequently done so. So anyway, thank you so much for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Click the notifications bell, otherwise you won't receive notifications when I drop a video. Please click on the end videos that are linked right at the end credits of this video. It helps with the promotion of this channel. If you like this content and you'd like to see more people join the channel, that's one way of doing it, to click the end videos and check them out. They usually are relevant to this particular topic. So thanks so much for watching. Till next time, bye for now.